Call the Town of Timnath Town Council work session to order. Mayor Mark Sukup.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brett Hansen.
Here.
Councilmember Lisa Lake.
Here.
Councilmember Robert Oxmacher.
Present.
Councilmember Luke Wagner.
Here. Is that better? Sorry. And so we went through and discussed, okay, let's just pay for it all since we have it. The other was, if we do 25%, we can keep our 50% reserve requirement intact that we voted on before. Now, it's not a requirement, it's a position of desire that we as a council gave to staff. And so that's there. I will say, the reason I like that is I think it lays everything out to the town. They'll have to vote for the bond issue, and they'll have to vote for the broadband, which will then hopefully give us authorization to go ahead and go forward. Although we do have authorization to do it as the town council. I'm going to introduce Melissa, who I just saw walk in. She helped us with all the financing structure and stuff, but she's also our guardian angel because she's the one who came up with the refinancing the debt and got us an interest rate that was phenomenal. So again, I know I've thanked you before, Melissa, but thanks again. So I'll let you take it over then, Brian. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, I agree. I think the finance committee had a really good work session. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Lisa. One of the considerations definitely was our cash reserve, but also what is the interest rates in the market? So that was a big topic that we had, both in what the bond issue would be and also what we could get for if we had extra cash. So there was that comment of what is our opportunity in this? And so we did have to make some assumptions, like this bond issue, if I understand correctly, wouldn't happen until next year. So kind of those assumptions are they could move with us, they can move against us. So those are some of the assumptions that the finance committee had to make in that as well.
And one of the comments that the group made was that if we borrow the 5 million, it's an easy thing to do. It gives everybody a reason why we're borrowing it and stuff. Whereas if we decide later that we want to put up an addition to the park or something like that, that may be a more difficult thing to sit there and go through. So that's the stuff we talked about. And so its recommendation, the finance recommendation, was to do one of two things: either pay for it, correct me if I'm wrong, because we've never really absolutely said, here's our recommendation. But my understanding was our recommendation was to pay for it totally with cash from our reserves, or to borrow 25%. Yeah. No. Yeah. Okay. So with that, Brian, do you want to take it over?
Sure. And I would just like to say that that was my first finance committee meeting, and I found it actually very interesting and informative. So I
Thank you.
took a lot away from that. So thanks for making the time today. We're talking about broadband again. So this work session has a couple of goals. I will talk through the goals. We're going to talk about the project scope a little bit. We're going to talk about those financing options that Mark mentioned that we reviewed with the finance committee. And then we'd like to get some direction on the next steps. Those are kind of the key things we want to work through here. For me, the work session goals that I have is talking about the project and then defining that. Is broadband a capital project? And the financing will determine the timing of the project, or does the financing determine if it is a project? So that's a distinction I think that we didn't quite get at the last work session that I would like to have some clarity on. Clearly, we want to get some direction on the amount and method of the financing for the project, and then talk about the timing of construction. There are some opportunities with the feeder line coming from the Ptarmigan subdivision, bringing it up to Timnath South, and then some conduit and active construction subdivisions that I want to talk about. So we can kind of just get a game plan together, and then we can bring some actions back to you. So to talk about the project scope, we have, the last time we were together talking in a work session, we were looking at kind of our overall broadband master plan, which was kind of a global approach to broadband, right? So now we have kind of scaled the project into what we think the project will look like to serve all of our current residents, our 2023, 2024, and then 2025 residents. So we're really taking a look at what that project to serve everybody who we think will be a resident by 2025. So you can see that in this map here, which I'll make a little bit bigger for you on your screens, we have included all three phases of all three filings of Saratoga, the whole of the Wild Wing subdivision, the whole of the Harmony subdivision, the currently platted areas of Timnath Lakes or Timnath Landing subdivision, Old Town, there's the development we're in right now, Riverbend, the Trailside development, Timnath South, everything that's built in Timnath Ranch currently, and Bruner Farms. So that's pretty much everything that was actively being built right now. There are a couple of things you can see in orange. The Springer Fisher subdivision that's on County Road 5. That's that kind of like elongated square project up there. They do have a first phase that's entitled, but they have not started construction yet. And we don't have any indications from them when they're going to start construction. So, and we'll talk about some contingencies as we get through the project. Another one is the Draley subdivision down here. They're working their way through the development process, but we're not sure exactly when they'll be shovel ready essentially. So those ones are not included in the estimate, but we'll cover that in a little bit.
Could I ask one quick question about the
Sure.
map?
Mm-hmm.
The yellow dots, those are planned residences on this map or existing residences?
They are existing and planned residences.
Okay, so the northern part of Timnath Ranch, I know we've had some various developments, and I'm not seeing yellow dots for there.
Correct. Yeah. So we can blow that up a little bit.
I don't mean to interrupt, but this feels relevant to the
Yeah.
existing slides.
No. So the yellow dots are actually address points. So over here where they have the multifamily buildings, each one of those is a address point. So it's 1 point there.
Okay, so we're
So-
covering those multifamily and then the townhomes on the west side, is that included? Okay, I'm gonna know.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's correct.
I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the T Rock subdivision, we have some allowance for that. Yep. Any other questions on the map? Let's get back to my. Oh, sorry. I'm just gonna share this in the Zoom meeting so people at home can see what we're talking about. So this kind of compares the strategic plan, which is where we started with the current scope. There are a lot of things, we in the strategic plan, we included full build out of Timnath Lakes, all of Springer Fisher, and then a couple other future developments that we thought were on the horizon there where we're doing the master plan for it. So we have taken some of these areas a little bit further. You can see here a blow up of the Timnath South area. This is a conduit plan and box vault plan. So what we wanted to do was take a stab at doing some low level design, which is detailed design on an area, and then cost check that against some of our assumptions that we were using for the per linear foot and per residence cost. So we did that so we could have that kind of that check, and it came out really close. Our estimates that we're using in the overall are a little bit higher than what was specifically here, which allows, this is a very dense subdivision. So we want to make sure that we're covering subdivisions that are a little more spread out where that infrastructure will be a little bit more stretched. But as far as a check's concerned, that came back the way we wanted it to look.
Just to add to Brian's part of this presentation, just as a reminder to council, the high level design, very budgetary level, very little information, design information based costs from. Now we've gone down to low level design, more due diligence, more design drawings, better lineal foot measurements, better count on materials. And that's what Brian's referring to when he talks about low level design and the map you see here. So we've done additional work and that's informed the cost exercise. So it's not unusual at a high level estimate to go from high level to a low level estimate to be 20 to 30% higher at the high level estimate to make sure you have enough budget covered. And by the time you get down to a low level estimate, it's better refined.
Any questions about that level of design or topics there? Okay. I think we're gonna have to look at a little bit messier screen layout here. So here's our updated project costs. You can see that this is the same format that we had in the overall master plan kind of level where we broke those down by project. But this is where we're estimating the full project cost of that 2025 build out. So there's two main sections. The top in the green is the distribution summary, and then the bottom in the gray is the feeder summary. The feeder is basically what's bringing the main line into Timnath and then routing it around from subdivision to subdivision. And then the distribution is just that. It's taking the service from that feeder line and then distributing it into the neighborhoods. So we're carrying 8% for general conditions for a general contractor. We've got the outside plant construction for conduit and vaults and for the fiber. Those you can see that the conduit and the vaults is the bulk of the cost, but the fiber is still substantial there. We have the material procurement. So that's actual purchase of materials for about $2.7 million. And then we have the premise installation. The premise installation is actually the service drops that go from the basically front yard of everybody's house to the house. So what we're carrying at that point is 50% of the houses that we're going to be passing. We're carrying the cost of serving those houses. We think that's a pretty good take rate for what we're doing. I think we're well positioned right now with the competition that there's not a lot of other similar services available to Timnath residents. If there are additional residences beyond that 50%, the provider will pick up that additional cost. Then we have our contingencies. We've got 5% of the materials as a inflation contingency, 8% on the overall project for an estimating contingency. That's if we go to the low level design and find that there's additional costs. 10% owner contingency. That's our protection that we're going to bring the project in. 2% of that cost is engineering and network design, and 1.5% is project management. So that brings us into the outside plant construction for a total of about 15.6 million. Then we have the feeder summary. So we have 4 different feeder lines going from 32E to Signal Tree, and that's basically bringing it from the Ptarmigan subdivision up through the sewer easement through Timnath South, all the way up to basically where we're sitting right now. Then we have a redundant feeder. That's the County Road 5 feeder that goes that's the 32E feeder, which goes from 3 to Signal Tree. I think that's supposed to be from up 5 to Signal Tree, right?
Yes.
So that would give us kind of a redundant system tying back down to Pulse. The County Road 5 feeder goes from Harmony Road all the way up to Wild Wing and then around. So it goes up 5 to Saratoga and then around to Wild Wing. And then we have a Harmony feeder that goes from Summerfields Parkway, serves Timnath Ranch, and comes up the other way to serve Harmony subdivision. So those 4 feeder lines, which gives us a little bit of redundancy in the network, comes in about 2.6 million. So those two numbers together, 15.6 and 2.6, bring us to 18.2. There's obviously some thousands and dollars in there that I'm rounding off. Then you'll notice that we've been talking about a $20 million number. Mark mentioned a $20 million. We'll always run that $20 million number. That additional 1.8 would allow us to bring on a Springer Fisher or a Draley or a White Wing, any of these projects that should happen to kind of move along at a rapid pace, and we want to get them included in the project. Any of those projects that we just mentioned would have a much lower per premise cost, because we'd be going in at the same time as development. We also see some cost savings in some of these other areas, and we'll talk about this later in the meeting, where we have opportunity to go in with development as opposed to retrofitting. When we're retrofitting, we're disturbing people's front yards. We have a lot of landscape repair. We're doing a lot more boring work where we can lay conduit and open trench as we're working in new development. So there's an efficiency there of about 50% in the cost per premise. Right now, we're estimating the cost per premise at about $3,800. So we'd see that at about $1,600, probably between $1,600 and $2,000 per premise. So a substantial cost savings when you're looking at new development. Any questions about the overall cost estimate, or feel free to try to poke holes. Keith's happy to answer those questions.
You plan on refining this 2 or 3 times from now, right?
That's correct. I think once we have some direction on funding, we'll be able to kind of group it into actual projects, do the low level design, and come back with more significant, with more detailed cost estimating.
Okay.
And that would be based off of actual contractor bid numbers. And some of this is based off of that currently. But just as a reminder to the council, the Pulse did a regional contract that is you can be shared amongst government agencies for broadband installation in Northern Colorado. And that contract was pursued by a number of contractors in Northern Colorado very aggressively because of the nature of it being more regional. And those current unit costs are equivalent to 2018 unit costs as far as like boring per lineal foot, setting vaults per each. And so those costs are being represented here plus some contingency. So the buying power that you all have relative to that contract is great. And we talk about that in the next slide a little bit as well. So just as a reminder, that's the contract that you all have access to do some of this work.
So I understood that that you've got that contract and that it fixes out. So why do you have materials cost inflation contingency and an estimating contingency?
So the, both of those two pieces, so in the telecommunications world, typically the materials are purchased and supplied to the contractor by the owner. So it's a separate contract altogether, and it comes from a supply warehouse. Pulse and other regional providers also have access to those contracts, and those prices are represented here. The material costs, again, we have a combination in this particular estimate of high-level design and low-level design. So we don't have low-level design and the detailed information for the entire town. If we did, then we wouldn't be taking or carrying some of these contingencies, Mayor, whereby we have material costs and inflation, estimating contingency, owner contingency.
Okay.
That inflationary piece is when you buy the materials at the time in which you buy them, because those supply houses won't insulate themselves or won't insulate you all, the owners, from those inflationary costs. So that gets passed along. So we carry some additional contingency on that. And then the estimating is just because we have a mix of.
So we can
detail level.
anticipate that when this is brought to us to approve and discuss the budget for the budget purposes, that these contingencies for the most part will be gone.
Correct.
I think that we will be still carrying some of these in the
Yeah,
overall.
you'll have a little bit. I have no doubt about
Yeah.
that, but not 18, 28, let's see, 13, 23, 23% contingency.
So the 5% materials cost is not on the 12 million, it's on the 2.7 million for materials.
Correct.
So it's not 5% of the overall project cost, it's just 5% of the materials.
Yeah, okay.
And I think we'll get closer on the 8%. I would still think that we'll be carrying that 10% through the construction phase.
It's
If that
typical
makes
for an
sense.
owner to carry an owner's contingency of around 10% all the way through construction. It's just good practice for unknowns that come up. And so that contingency will probably be there for the duration of the project. The other ones will fall off, or they'll turn into actual professional services costs. Like the engineering, network design, and project management.
Does that make sense?
My experience with contracts is at 7% contingency, but I'm not going to argue that at this point.
It's highly variable depending on the industry and what the work is. Sometimes this particular work warrants a 10%, Mr. Mayor, because of it's all underground construction. A lot of vertical construction on commercial buildings is usually 5 to 7% because there's not as much risk involved in the unknowns that are underground.
Okay, go ahead.
So this slide talks a little bit about where we were and where we are now. Our original in the strategic plan, we had an estimate of 29.5 million. Our current plan is a $20 million project. We explained kind of the differences there, but this kind of gives you some metrics on that scope. We've decreased the road miles from 78 miles to 60 miles. We've decreased the total cost per linear foot from $70 to $49. Really, when we were working on the strategic plan, that was over a year ago, and we didn't really have a specific timetable when we thought we would be looking at construction. So we wanted to make sure at that point that we were kind of carrying some of these inflationary costs that might, if this ended up being a 5, 7, 8, 10-year project, that we would, we were kind of accounting for some of that. I think we also didn't have the numbers from the Loveland contract at that point either, which were quite beneficial to us.
Can you account for the decrease in road miles on there?
Yeah, I think that's just the interior roads in like the Fisher subdivision or in the White Wing subdivision, some of these in the Timnath Lake subdivision. So these are both the feeder line and the local streets.
Okay. So because those divisions are a little bit in limbo with the review plans, that accounted for 18 miles of road is what we're saying.
That's
Okay.
correct.
All right, thank you.
For example, Fisher, we use their full subdivision sketch plan to plan the costs there. Their first filing plat that was approved is, I think their total build out is between 500 and 700 units. Their total plat is like 200, their first filing plat is like 200 units. So even if we did add them back, it wouldn't be the whole piece of that. It would just be a smaller portion. Good, okay. Now I'm going to turn it over to Melissa for the financial update. Mark kind of ran through some of the real high numbers on it, but I think we've got your presentation here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Melissa Buck. I think I've met a few of you, but not everybody, and I'm the town's municipal advisor. So as part of looking through the various financing options and with looking at the project, we ran various different scenarios, including, as the mayor mentioned, paying for it fully in cash, all the way to fully financing the entire project. So at the last finance committee, the slide you see before you is just a high level overview summary of what we discussed and the options that we have in front of council for consideration. So for the purposes of running any bond numbers, we assumed the project's going to cost 20 million. I know that's a little bit more than what Brian has included in his numbers, but since we're in the planning phase, we like to be very conservative with our numbers. And as part of that, we assumed that the town would use about 1.2 million in ARPA funds. And then the remainder, if we weren't going to do 100% of financing, the remainder would come from cash reserves. The scenarios for council consideration today is fund 100% of the project costs from cash reserves, or use some debt financing to fund a portion of the project cost to accelerate the build out. And so what we have in here in our presentation is a 50-50 mix with the debt financing over 20 years, and then 75% cash and 25% debt, and that would be repaid over a 10-year term. So moving on to the next slide. Before getting into some of the bond financing numbers, a common question I get from a lot of my clients is, what is the appropriate fund balance? The town right now, as the mayor mentioned, has the cash to pay for this project in its entirety, but it would probably also deplete reserves. So the question is, well, what is an appropriate level to maintain? And it depends on every municipality, quite frankly. The town's current policy is 25% with a goal of at least 50%. In my experience, I think that's probably roughly in somewhere between those numbers is probably an appropriate number, because ultimately the reserve is there to cover any sort of unexpected cost that might come up. Having a healthy reserve is also very important too when we go talk to the rating agencies, should the council decide to authorize any sort of debt, or I should say, if voters authorize any sort of debt. Going on to the next slide. Okay. The town's policy is to maintain at least 3 months or 25% of current operating expenditures. If the town were to, as I mentioned previously, if the town were to fully fund the project, let's say over 2 years, then you would have no cash reserves. I don't think anybody would recommend that scenario. And then over 3 years, it would reduce the cash reserves to about 3%. And funding over 4 years, it ranges and pretty much goes down to 23%. At the finance committee, we spent a lot of time going through some of these numbers, and just want to emphasize that this is a pretty conservative projection on the town's projected fund balance, revenues, expenditures, all that sort of stuff. So I'll stop there and take any questions if anybody has any.
Lisa, would you be able to explain what conservative means for your estimate?
Yeah. I don't take into account on the revenue side any new commercial development, which would obviously impact our sales tax revenue. Also on the expense side, it includes a fully funded CIP without making any adjustments to what was approved at the last budget cycle. And we sort of don't put in the kitchen sink, but we project out all planned positions. We put in inflationary numbers each year. So as expenses increase, that's what's accounted for in those numbers.
So short version is she didn't include top golf.
What's the general increase used on just our current revenue sources with sales tax numbers and whatnot?
I believe sales tax is projected. I'd have to go back and look, I think at 7%.
Okay. So we were pretty conservative on that side as well,
Mhm.
based on what we have historically seen.
Yes.
Okay, so on the next slide, what you see in front of you is a summary of the two debt financing options for town or for council to consider. One would be 25% of the project cost repaid over 10 years. And then the other column is 50% of the project cost repaid over 20 years. So with the true interest cost, which is a number that I focus on because that covers all your fees, meaning your cost of issuance, takes into account any sort of premium or discount on the bonds. And pretty much it's an all-in number. So on both of these scenarios, it's about 5%. You know, and I'll say the difference between the two, typically for smaller issues, it tends to have a little bit more. They cost a little bit more just because the cost of issuance relative to the bond size tends to be a little bit higher. So maximum annual debt service for 25% project is about $630,000 per year. We used a level debt service structure on this. So, you know, it's going to be roughly around $630,000 every single year, give or take a few $1,000s. And then for the 50% scenario, the maximum annual debt service is about $753,000.
Melissa, could you speak to the timing of this again?
Sure. So if the council were to ask voters to approve any debt at this November election, typically it takes about 60 days to do any sort of financing from point of authorization, you give me the go ahead, to when we close and those funds are delivered. And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned, we have to go to the rating agencies, we have to talk to them and get a rating on this. And then more really what it is, it's drafting the disclosure documents with bond counsel and the various iterations that takes. So November, given, you know, holidays and all that sort of stuff. I mean, realistically, you'd probably be looking at sometime in February at the earliest. Okay, and then you know, keeping in mind the town's working reserve policy and just generally what is a good fund balance level to maintain, we plugged in what it would look like for both scenarios in Lisa's projections for the town's revenues and expenditures. So over the 25% debt financing scenario, it would allow the town to maintain at least a 44% fund balance level. And that's even with a shortened term. Previously, when we started this, we were looking at 20 years across the board. And so this is a much shorter term than the 50% scenario, which, as you might expect, because your debt service, your expenditures are over a longer period of time, your cash balance is a little bit higher because you're not spending that cash. You know, it's like I said, these are pretty conservative projections. 44% would still, in my opinion, be sufficiently close to the town's 50% goal, and definitely well in excess of the 25%. But if 50%, keeping that as a hard line, if that's council's desire, then funding up to 50% of the project would probably make a lot more sense.
Can I ask a question real quick? Let's just say we ended up with a 20-year bond here. And I know we want to plan for the worst, but if interest rates improve, 5 years from now, 6 years from now, would there be opportunity to refinance and
Yes.
and improve on that?
Yes, yes. With both of these scenarios, we would build in the most flexible call option that we possibly could. So for a 10-year bond option, typically you're looking 5 years, generally speaking. On or around the day of pricing, we talk to any underwriter or anything like that. We try to figure out, okay, so how much does it cost to have a little bit of an earlier call option, meaning it gets priced into your rate the overall rate. And if it's not too much, then maybe it makes sense. Maybe instead of 5 years, we look at 3 years, for example. On the 20-year option, 10 years is the most common call that you see. I would say like 7 to 10 years typically. So with something like that, if we were to do a negotiated bond sale, for example, then we would look at pricing in one term bond for 5 years, another at 7 years, and another at 10, so that you would have that flexibility far sooner than 10 years to refinance.
And then what about, let's say we had, some major new commercial development or something that had sales tax revenue higher than expected? What are the options to look at paying it down early? Is that
Yeah, so with the
available?
call option, you can't prepay. Not until that call option is exercised. So for example, if let's say you had a ton of growth and a lot of sales tax revenues and we had a 5-year call option, then you could choose in 5 years to just completely pay off the bonds. But prior to that 5 years, you would not be able to do anything. What you could do is take that money, set it aside, invest it, and then utilize it to repay the debt.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Brian, do you have any more?
Do you have more, Melissa?
I think it's just the last slide, where it talks about the pros and cons. And then as the mayor mentioned, the finance committee recommendation would be for council to approve up to 25% of the project cost and then fund the remainder from cash reserves.
So procedurally, let's see, we do not vote in a special session, correct?
That's correct. Correct.
So it looks like to me we need 2 resolutions at some point, at some way. Yeah, wake up, Carolyn. Pardon? I think we will. One is to decide to do a community-wide broadband construction, because we never done that. We've talked about it, but we haven't really approved it yet. And then the second one is if we agree with that, then how do we finance the broadband? And there's, if I got it right, Melissa, between you and the finance committee, the recommendation is all cash, do a 10-year, 25% debt borrowing on it, which would be $5 million of borrowing, 15 million of cash. And the other choice is 10 million of cash and 10 million of debt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So that's the 2 proposals. I broke up the one. I guess we got one proposal and one A, B, C type thing. So how do we go about that, Carolyn?
Okay, so we have on the agenda an executive session. So if you want to, first of all, before you make decisions, go into executive session, we can do that. So we have notice for an executive session. Otherwise, you could definitely do motions. So the first one for a community-wide broadband, it would need to
So
come back
here's,
to you.
here's the question though. Since we're on a work session, since we're on a work session, are we allowed to pass a resolution?
No.
No,
I
but
didn't think so.
well, but we also posted notice of a special meeting
Yeah,
as
so
well.
we'd go to a next meeting. I get that, but I'm trying to figure out what we do right now.
Okay,
And if and we don't pass a resolution right now, but we can in our executive session, that's fine. I'm just trying to make sure we get the procedure right.
So Mark, I think this is a good opportunity to have a discussion and kind of figure out a direction. Then you have the special meeting, which will adjourn this one and go into, then you can take action. Or if you come to a consensus either at that point, or we could bring it to a future agenda, like in 2 weeks for the regular meeting. So you'd have some ability to make things happen first by discussing it now in the work session, and then either making an action in the special meeting or having us do it at the second meeting of this
Is the
month.
reason you don't want us to discuss both of these resolutions, let's say, is that we can't, or you're suggesting procedurally? In other words, I don't understand, why don't we just go to exec session, discuss it, and do the resolution?
We absolutely can. Yeah,
Okay, I think that's
100%.
what I'd like to do.
We don't have it, the
Hold on.
staff does not have any resolutions prepared, so you would be
Yeah,
creating a resolution on the fly. I
I'm
don't
good
think
at that.
Or it can be a motion. It does not need to
Yeah.
be an executive. It does not need to be a resolution.
From the project standpoint, we don't need any
Right.
official action right now. We just need some general direction on what you want to see us bring back. I think that we want to bring back more detailed information to you about what a specific project would be, or, that. So I think the goal of the work session is to just have the discussion amongst the council members and the staff, and
So
then
you don't want an approval of anything. So that's what we've been doing with the broadband, and I'm okay if that's what we're gonna do, which means we've never approved a broadband project.
It is going to come back to you with a specific contract. So they're going to come back with a specific contract that's an IGA and a contract with the provider. So that will come back before you. So even if you have a motion, it's really a motion to pursue broadband. You're not approving the full broadband project because you don't have the contract before you. But the second thing, in terms of the financing, the deadlines to make a November election, the first deadline is at the end of July, I believe July 27th, 29th, I think, where if you have taken action, you notify the county that you're planning to participate in that election. And then really the drop dead deadline is at the end of August. So you have some additional time before you would actually, then it will come before you like the other election resolutions, that you'll have a resolution to refer a ballot question to the voters, and that will be before you, as well as an IGA with each county to coordinate that election. So you are providing direction right now, and then those items are going to be brought back to you at a future meeting.
Okay, so let's proceed on with direction. So I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse if we decided to go ahead with broadband. And just so you know, I want to go on record that I am not for broadband. And I think it's a technology that will become antiquated irrespective of what a few people have told me. But I want to make sure that that we make that decision. Luke?
Yeah, I would like to give direction to move forward with
Okay.
broadband.
Yeah, it would also be my direction that we will be moving forward with broadband as a project.
Okay.
Ditto.
Yeah, and let me flesh it out a little bit more, which is the feedback from the town has been 70–80% in support of broadband. We did have the ballot measure last time that encouraged us to explore options. So I do think we're acting in accordance with what the community has said. I also think that if we're going to do this, and it sounds like that's the direction, that it does make sense to move quickly here. You know, we're fighting against escalating costs. So the longer we wait to move, the more this project would likely cost us in the long run. I think we want to be careful not to fall behind the development curve in that, you know, the sooner we do this, the more we're trenching in undeveloped land as opposed to trying to retrofit. So the overall cost project would be less there. I also think that there's a fairness aspect to this, which is if we don't do this, what will happen in 10 years is some of our community will have access to high-speed broadband, and a lot of our community will not, including a good portion of our existing community. You know, we've seen there may be some providers that would come in and lay new fiber in new development, but we're probably unlikely to see that for our existing residents. So I think for all these reasons, it does make sense to move forward, to give direction to staff to pursue this, and then also to have a discussion about the financing piece. And then, you know, I think we should have as much of this conversation as we can in public. I think before there's any official approval, we'll of course want to have an opportunity for public comment. But you know, just in terms of generally giving staff direction, I think we can do that today to encourage them to continue to move forward, continue to develop plans, and then come to us with an agenda item with sufficient time to meet the statutory deadline to get financing on the ballot if that's the direction we're going.
And I don't disagree with a lot of what you said. I will add, though, that the Wall Street Journal just reported today that inflation has dropped to 4%. So hurrying because of a cost concern isn't the right direction, but hurrying because of a voting decision we have to make and take out in November is a reason to proceed swiftly.
Mark, could I add one comment?
Yes.
I want to build a little bit what Robert said, just regarding the public outreach part, because if anybody wants, any of the members of the public are watching or choose to review this, you know, it is a big project. So I think it's important that we outline the public input. We've had 3 significant points of contact with the public on this. You know, we had a general survey in late 2021 or mid 2021. And yes, it was 80% of the town that wanted it. We had an election question in the spring of 22, authorizing the town to treat it as a public utility. We had a more targeted survey in early of 23, in which, again, 80% of the town was saying they'd be willing to spend. We had half of the respondents say that they were willing to spend extra to get this built out. So I'm seeing 3 different surveys over a stretch of 2 years, and the percentages haven't changed all that much. And for comparison, we built the police building for at $13.5 million. And our main data point on that was the 2018 survey, in which 45% of 500 respondents said that the police building was their top priority over a rec center or over the town center. In addition to 2/3 of the town saying that public safety was their first or second budget priority. But right along with that, it was a couple percent lower was public construction projects and infrastructure. So I think that was an equally important aspect for the town. So I think we've done a lot of outreach to this point. We're going to continue to do it and look for opportunities to make sure the public has input. But I've seen a higher level of public input taken in on this project over any other project that we've committed millions of dollars to, whether it's parks or police stations. And so I just want to make sure that's clear, as if the community is asking about why we're moving forward with this. I think it's a strong case to be made. It's what the voters are telling us. So I just wanted to add to that part.
Mark, can I add one thing as well?
Sure.
So a couple of months ago or a few months ago, when we were initially talking about this project, you had mentioned, I can't remember which one you mentioned, but said that there were lots of opportunities for funding from state, federal, whoever that was. I know you mentioned, I think it was 1.2 million, but I would also like to encourage us to apply for whatever additional funding, separate from the funding discussion we're going to have, but to try to get as much additional, whether it's free money or we're matching or something like that, as much as we can.
To that note, this morning, the town of Timnath was certified as broadband ready, which was like a pre-approval process for working through grant applications. So we're through that first stage and we'll be continuing to look for those opportunities. Some of in our interview about that topic, some of their concerns or some of the things they asked us to look at was partnering with some of the adjacent underserved areas. By the metrics of the, kind of the plan definition for both Colorado and for the Fed, the thresholds are rather low as far as where they're allocating some of the grant funding. But there are some other adjacent areas to us that we might be able to partner with the county to pursue some grant funding opportunities that would serve county residents, but then also help with some of our costs as well.
Thank you.
And also, Brian, on that point, a lot of those areas are areas that are within our growth management area and ultimately could be part of the town as well, right?
Yep. Yeah, direct. And the county is very interested in serving these kind of county subdivisions that are enclaved and helping fund those. So, as we take feeder line up County Road 5, we'll be passing some of those county subdivisions. So there's an opportunity for partnership there. We'll look for all of those opportunities.
Great. Okay, let's talk about the financing options. I see that we've been presented with 3 vetted options. And so I'd like to stay with there unless somebody has a deep decision not to do that. So the first one is to fund it with all cash. The second one is to fund it with 25% debt, which would also, based on Melissa's suggestion, be a 10-year bond. And the third is a 20-year bond, which we borrow 50%. And I'll relay what the Finance Committee, so the rationale of borrowing and that kind of stuff. One was that we're running along fat hogs right now. We've got Costco doing great, Walmart doing great. What happens if Walmart does a Target and all of a sudden people boycott it and we lose a chunk of our revenues? I'm not saying that's happening, but I'm saying we've got to be aware that it's not always going to be our big sales source. So the thought of the Finance Committee is having a reserve, and they tried to be conservative with it, conservative being borrowing less than what they thought that we really would need. And it really settled at 25. Melissa since has increased it to 20-year and 50% on her sheet. But really what the Finance Committee said was 10 years and $5 million. The reason for it too, the second reason for that is it takes our reserve from 23% as shown with all cash to 50%. And I think the Finance Committee felt more comfortable that let's stay with 50% at one time. That was the goal of the council, and to continue on. Now realize it's not a mandate, it's a suggestion that we all passed together back a year ago, Brett? Huh? 2.5. Time goes fast when you get old. So that was the thinking there. The other is, and Luke asked a great question during the committee meeting, is what will we do with that cash? Well, having it in reserve just gives us a safety net. The second thing is it's not going to cost us anything. we borrow for 5%. And right now, I mean, I'm not an institutional investor. My bonds are at 4.9%. So basically it's a push as to we can invest exactly what we're borrowing for, or exactly what we're borrowing the rate for. And so for those reasons, I was convinced of the 25. There's no right or wrong on this. You know, I mean, let's get real. There's no right or wrong. It's a matter of, do you like blue or green? And so we're sitting pretty good with it. So I guess I already stated my position too. So we'll go around and see what you guys think and what you fall on. So I'll start with you, Robert.
Okay, thanks. And then let me just ask one question. You know, we had, at least I had floated the possibility of investigating sales tax as an opportunity to help this. I understand any sales tax revenue would, be revenue that would follow, a year or two later behind the project. But did the committee give any discussion to that as a possibility?
We did. We looked at, so where we originally started was 50% and 100% debt financing. And then we also looked at the same scenarios with the associated tax increase. It comes back to how much cash does the town want to maintain? If based off of the projected numbers, the town was going to have over 100%, like well over 100%. And then as sales taxes continue to increase year over year, then, whatever the ask would be, whether it was a quarter or 30 cents or whatever, that those revenues generated from that would continue to be much greater. So, based off of what the finance committee was looking at with the fund balance level, that's how we ended up with, we don't need to ask voters for a tax increase.
Well, my thought is, although we have the money to pay for this up front, I think it does make sense to try to do a 25% bond measure on this. I do want to maintain that reserve flexibility. I don't want to have us deplete our fund so much with this that we lose the opportunity to take advantage of other other items that might come up and be beneficial. So I think maintaining that flexibility makes sense. Also, I like the idea of taking it to the voters, allowing them again to reaffirm our commitment to this. It'll also be a way to help educate them in terms of this is happening, maybe generate some excitement as well. So that's kind of the direction I'd suggest.
I'm also supportive of the 25%, though I'm guessing that once we ask the question, we have to actually come up with a specific dollar amount would be my guess as far as what we put on the ballot.
So on the ballot, right. I mean, you'd have to come up, typically the question that's asked, we do like a parameters question, basically saying, okay, should the town's debt be increased by $5 million with the repayment cost not to exceed whatever it is,
Okay.
So, and the reason why we do that is to provide for some sort of flexibility, but it's also required under Tabor.
Okay, perfect. And then I think that as far as when you mentioned the terms and being able to pay off early, if for some reason we end up with additional tax revenue coming in, I think that would be important to include in there as well.
Okay. Luke?
So I just want to ask a couple clarifying questions. So if we do the 25% bond, does that actually delay the start of the project? How that work in terms of our timelines? I know we had a slide up there that there was timelines. I just want to talk about how the bond will affect our timelines.
Yeah, I think, if the council's direction is that broadband is a project, and this kind of goes back to that first slide, is broadband a project and financing determines the timing of it, or does the financing vote determine if it becomes a project? That's the direction. I think if it's the former, where the financing determines the timing, we have money in the CIP this year, we have money in the CIP next year. There's no reason we can't get started. And then that would then just accelerate the project.
Okay.
So I don't think we have the option of delaying to start the project until after the election, or we could start earlier and then that would accelerate the pace.
In our numbers, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but the difference between where we talked about 23 and 25% was how much?
500,000.
500,000. Okay. And in this, so my stance is that I would say that we go, and I've taken the same stance with the finance committee, is that we fund this all with cash. My look at that is I'm hopeful, and I definitely think having a reserve is nice. I think 25% to 50% should absolutely be our goal. I just worry about carrying too much cash. I believe that we should use the cash as the voters want, that we are not in that business. We should use it to provide for our residents. So that's why I went with, if we've got the cash, we should spend it. We should do this project. And I do think my goal out of this, no matter what, is to start as soon as possible. So I think I still stand with, I would like to fund it with all cash, get the project going, and then look to the future of saying, you know, if we're going to go to the voters, I would look to say, let's take something to the voters that maybe would be an amenity type look at things, rather than just a broadband, which I consider a utility more than that. So if we're going to go to voters, I would think it'd be something that, you know, would be exciting, or something the town, we see in other voting things. So I kind of lean towards that. If we're going to go to the voters, we should maybe think of another project.
Brett?
I guess first off, I'll express one concern with some of the comments, because I feel like there's a little bit of mixed direction we're giving the staff on if this is a project or not, because I'm hearing, let's give the voters another chance to weigh in.
No, this is a second discussion. So the first
Right,
discussion.
but I'm
was-
hearing, and within this discussion, let's let people vote again with whether or not we're going to do this. Those are comments that I've heard. As we're talking, am I?
Well-
Do you feel you have a clear direction on this, or is there some mixed messages on? Are we going forward no matter what? Even if we have an election, if they voted no, we're still going forward. Do you have clear direction on that?
Well, I think if you go for a vote and it goes no, that puts you all in a tough spot, because you have also said go for it. So I think that is a consideration, that you're saying, yes, it's a project, and then you put it to voters, and if they say no, then you're in a tight spot. So it is a little bit confusing.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're being clear to staff on what our expectation is if we're going to do an election, does that impact whether we're going to do this? Or is this just, we're trying to boost our financial position is kind of where that's what I'm hearing. So maybe we can have some follow-up just on that point. And then a second point, I would lean a little bit towards the cash option, and here's why. I feel like if we ask the voters to approve a bond, we're not asking them to approve a bond for broadband. We're asking them to approve a bond so that we can have more money in the bank for an unknown reason. There may be a good unknown reason that pops up in a year that we can't conceive of, but I feel like that's the reason we're asking. And, you know, with the all cash option, our low point is $12.5 million of reserves. With the 25% financing, our low point is 16 million. So we're asking the voters approve this bond so we can have 16 million in the bank instead of 12.5 million. I mean, I feel like if I were to get that question, you know, at the state level, if the state of Colorado wanted $1 billion in reserves instead of 800 million or whatever it is, I kind of roll my eyes, I think, at that question. I do feel like if we're going to ask the community to finance something, it needs to be tied to something concrete rather than us maybe possibly wanting to do something with the money. I feel like that was kind of the reason the town voted down the sales tax increase multiple times. It was kind of nebulous with what the town wanted to do with all this money. It was just, we want more money to do things. So I would lean towards the cash option. I think if there are even increasingly worst case scenarios that happen, you know, the timeline can be extended a year as well. Like we're not locked into a 4-year build out. I think we still have options. We can still protect those reserves with pushing out the project timeline a year. I would lean towards that or if we are going to finance something, I would like it to be very clear to the public what we're doing and why we're asking them to approve this bond. And it is to boost our reserves. It's not to pay for broadband. So those are my feelings and thoughts I would lay out.
Brett, thanks. You make a really good point there. I guess how I had conceptualized this is that the bond allows us to accelerate the project without going below our reserve standards. And so kind of the pitch is you're gonna get broadband anyways, but if you vote yes, we can get it to, some people in the town a year or two sooner while still maintaining our reserve standards. It's kind of how I conceptualized it.
And to be clear, I initially proposed the bond a few months back as an option. And part of the reasoning for that was we were being told 2 years versus 10 years with our build out. So I certainly appreciate that perspective. I'm just seeing we're accelerating this by 1 year to get it out to the whole town. I think for half the town, we're not accelerating it at all with a bond. And if we're delaying things in any way because of
Just a
a
second, you
vote.
said a factual thing. I want to make sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was 4 years that it's a build out with all cash.
Right. And if we use a bond, it'd be 3 years. But did I catch that right?
It's 4 fiscal years, but
Yeah.
probably a 3-year construction window.
Okay.
So we would start midway through 2023, all of 24, all of 25, and finish midway through 2026.
Okay. So I'm looking at this slide. The difference between 100% cash funded and the 25% debt is 1 year. That's the timeline that we're looking at shaving off. And it's probably on the back end of the project. So we're talking everything near Harmony Road probably doesn't see any difference in the timeline. Maybe a couple months. So I'm having trouble justifying a hard benefit to debt other than we want to make sure we have good reserves and maybe the publicity of it. It feels like we have to justify some soft benefits. Is the thoughts I'm wishing for us to consider.
Luke?
Yeah, I agree completely with Brett on that. And like I said, I think if we're going to go to the voters, we better be clear. Absolutely. And I think I would like to see, is there something, we've talked a lot about a rec center. I just worry that again, having if we ask town staff to tighten their belt and we can get there with $500,000, that feels reasonable to me. Asking for that additional 5 million is definitely tough.
Can I ask a clarifying question to Lisa? So will you just, I know you said this earlier, so I apologize. So you were saying that let's assume we go to the 100% cash funded, and the amounts that you had in reserve, you mentioned were the very most conservative numbers. Do you have an idea of how much we have, let's say, in future years for, let's say, capital improvement projects or something where it's not something we've started right now that could potentially be delayed or something if we wanted to focus on the broadband while keeping reserves, or like we would have a pick and choose, right? Like we would have options. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So we have 16 million in 2024 in capital, 11 million in 2025, 14 million in 26, and then 17 million in 2027.
And some of those are new projects, as well as some that are continuing
Right.
projects.
Some we already have in design and already started, and then some are new.
Okay. And I was just asking that because, after hearing like a year, I know at the initial meetings, and maybe I still had that number in my head as far as accelerating. I don't have a super strong. I don't necessarily think we have to do the debt, but I do feel pretty strongly about wanting to maintain some kind of reserve or adequate reserves. But if we have some leeway where, come it's almost budget time now, but come budget time, if we can, come up with options about if we completely fund this to be quickly, what could we put on hold from some other projects? Knowing that if our tax revenue is higher, we may not have to put those on hold after all. I would be supportive of that. And I didn't mean to be wishy-washy and change my mind, but thank you for the additional information.
And I think what's important, I think what's important though, is if we talk about maybe our sales tax revenue going down, we're talking about growth slowing in the town of Timnath. So I'd expect that not only would we look at our capital plan, but I think we'd look across the entire budget as far as staffing goes as well. So when we say conservative, I like what the stance Lisa's taken, but we wouldn't be like, oh, this is headed this way, but let's continue to add all these additional staffing, all those things when we talk about our budgets.
So I think we ended up at a 3-2 cash decision.
Sorry.
No, that's fine to change. At that, I don't know if there's anything more to talk about. Okay,
I have
so
one more slide. And that was our third, the third goal for the work session was kind of the moving forward. So I heard Luke say that he wants to move forward as soon as possible on some of these things. There are two opportunities that I wanted to just kind of briefly go over. One is the construction in the Ptarmigan Golf Course that's being served by Pulse in a partnership with Larimer County. We'll have the opportunity to continue the work that they're doing to start bringing that feeder network up to Timnath. And then the second one is, taking advantage of some of the subdivisions that are currently under construction and looking at getting some low-level design for those and getting conduit in place so that we're saving some of that cost as far as, basically a retrofit versus a greenfield development on those. So if those are interesting topics, we can provide specific project costs for some of these things and bring those back as future council action items.
we've got to still vote on broadband, which I would guess we'll do in the next meeting or so. And so that would be an excellent time to do that.
Is that the direct, though, we want to explore those projects and bring them forward as projects?
I don't know why we wouldn't.
Do we vote on that, or is it just related to budget and projects, contracts being brought forward to us?
Well, so, I mean, if I were to make this analogous to a park project, during the budgeting process, we allocate money in the capital improvement plan for those. And then when we're actually ready to start expending those funds, we bring the contracts forward to the council for approval. So
we have to approve the budget for broadband.
You have to approve any expenditures over Aaron's authority for broadband,
which is 30,000. So
yeah.
let's not get.
We're not gonna get too far.
Let's make sense on what happens.
Well, in our capital improvement plan for 23 at 2 million for broadband, and if we're talking about 5 million in 23, we'd be amending something. We'd have some kind of vote to amend something.
Yes.
I assume. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think these two projects are significantly less than that 2 million.
Okay.
But they would give us a jump start on kind of moving forward. And then I think we can bring a larger project forward and talk about how to handle that.
But I think it's the whole picture, Brian. What do you want for us to expend and approve for expenditures in the remaining of this year and the start of next year? And whether it's including the Ptarmigan deal or whether it's not, I don't think we care, as long as you just choose what you think the queue should be.
I think we can start looking at the projects and kind of pair that with the budgeting process so that we can kind of work through that during the budgeting.
Okay. All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn this work session?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, let's take a 5-minute, maybe 7-10-minute break and begin the discussion on the attorney and start an exec session on that.
So we actually have an exec session scheduled.
I know we set it up, Aaron. We set it up so that it was bifurcated. So we could, if this happened, which we thought might, which we got an extra 30 minutes, instead of us sitting here twiddling our fingers, we start an exec session for 30 minutes. We will close it and then maybe reopen it after we get done with our regular meeting.
And we have two topics for the executive session. One is the deal points for the IGA on broadband, and one is for the town attorney. So if we want to continue the broadband piece, or you.
Well, I was told that we didn't need it. So now what?
There's a few deal points that the council might want to hear as it relates to the IGA will ultimately sign with Pulse. So I don't think it has to be necessarily a long discussion, but I think it would be good for the council to hear those and then offer any feedback you might have. And some of it would be proprietary. So that's why we would use executive session to be able to talk about that.
So we're closed on the work session. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll take and then we'll begin exec session for the broadband.
I
Order the special meeting. Mayor Mark Sukup,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brett Hansen,
Here.
Councilmember Lisa Lake. Here. Councilmember Robert Oxmacher,
Present.
Councilmember Luke Wagner.
Here.
Brian, I don't have a clue what you got here, so why don't you take it?
So next you need a motion to go into executive session pursuant to 2A. So you can read it from the agenda. You have the agenda.
Wrong paper, wrong agenda. That one. All right, so I would move to go to executive session pursuant to section 24-6-4024 CRS for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiation, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators related to agreements regarding Pulse broadband.
I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. We are adjourned.
Okay, I will call the regular town council meeting to order. Mayor Mark Sukup,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brett Hansen,
Here.
Councilmember Lisa Lake,
Here.
Councilmember Robert Oxmacher,
Present.
Councilmember Luke Wagner.
Here.
Aaron, do we have any amendments to the agenda? No. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to start out. Every definition. So story is figure out what it was. So the dad ran out. And fire kept getting worse and worse. So we called him. Asked Maya to go ahead and take her twin brother. Go ahead, Barbara.
Come on, I got you.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, you can sit next to you. There you go. So Maya, with a cool head, well, her dad called out and said, hey, we're on fire. Get the dogs and your brothers out of the house. So she ran upstairs and got Corbin, who was in his bedroom, and brought him down with one dog. And then Nick went and got the other dog and got out. And everybody obviously came out unscathed and are alive today to talk about it. So we are here to honor them for being such heroes and showing such courage for people as young as they are. So I've got a plaque for you, Maya, that says for displaying exceptional courage and heroism, Timnath Town Council 2023. And for you, Nick, for displaying exceptional courage and heroism, Timnath Town Council. Okay. Thank you for being heroes and making us proud. All right, that was fun. You bet. We'll see ya. Thanks, Susan, as you go out. She's the instigator here too. Okay. Public comment. Melissa.
Patty, would you double check for me? There was no one signed up when we started the meeting. No public comment.
Okay, thank you. Consent agenda. Any comments on the consent agenda, council? Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda is passed 4-0 unanimously. Reports. We already took care of Maya and Nick. And strategic plan. Do you want to talk about that, Aaron, or?
So, real quick, Mark, I do have one quick.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I
No,
didn't see you.
It's okay. It's just a quick item. I don't know if folks noticed, but the striping in the Walmart parking lot was implemented. So thank you to Dawn and the rest of the team.
Yay.
Make that happen. As those may remember, that's something that Walmart had committed to doing quite some time ago. And we eventually got it done. I think thanks to some help from maybe some local media attention. But I appreciate the staff staying on that. So I think the plan right now is to observe for a bit and see in what ways hopefully that improves traffic flow, and then reconvene and reassess. So at least thank you to everyone who finally brought that to
Any
fruition.
follow-up on that, Don?
No, we are monitoring it daily. So we're seeing some optimistic signs that it's.
Are you happy with the results so far?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll make one quick comment there as well, Mark.
Oh, sure.
I just want to acknowledge the efforts of people in the community during the storms we had this weekend. I know on Sunday night it got a tad wet, and I know I saw lots of people around the community running around to help neighbors, to deal with window wells flooding, to get houses cleaned up. I saw a lot of that effort, a lot of cars lined up at homes that were having struggles, and it's just such a great thing to live in this kind of community. So I want to make sure that's acknowledged.
Good job. All right. Anybody else before I get going? All right. Business resolution number 39, series 2023. A resolution authorizing construction of the 2023 improvements at Whitesell Park. You got me doing it now.
Actually, Mark, we actually did skip ahead on the strategic plan update.
Oh, that's right. I asked and then it got pulled back out.
Yeah, I threw you off. I'm sorry.
So Aaron?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. This is the strategic plan adopted by the council just a few months ago. And as part of that initial discussion, the council feedback was to provide periodic quarterly updates. And that's what you have in front of you, is a report providing an update on some of the items that have some work done to them. And we plan to continue that going forward for the council. We plan to just include it as a report, so not necessarily something we would speak to each time unless you do have specific questions or comments, but making it available so you can see progress as it's being made.
I will make the comment that I was impressed with the number of items that you've been able to start and complete up to this point. So I think I'm getting a unanimous head nod here. So thanks.
And I have a question, Aaron. Is our budget alignment and our strategic plan in alignment still?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the plan. We've alluded to it a couple of times tonight, but the budget season is nearly upon us. And so we do plan to use this plan as we go forward in the budget, and asking our department heads specifically to align projects, especially if it's something that would be new funding or a new program, that it aligns to these goals we've received from the council.
Thank you.
Okay, now resolution number 39, series 2023, a resolution authorizing construction of the 2023 improvements at Whitesell Park. Brian.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a project that we've been working on for quite some time. We did competitively, we talked about the scope a little bit when we were doing the crossing agreement with the Cache-La-Poudre Reservoir Company, but I'll just run through the improvements real quick, and then just talk about a little bit about the bid process. So we are making some, basically doing some completion work here. We are completing the loop trail with a soft surface trail and a crossing of the inlet canal. So that happens up at the very northwest part of is the crossing. And then there's a section of trail that has not been completed. So we're going to complete that piece of the trail too. That's a soft trail that will complete the loop. We do see a lot of pioneer trails in that area. So we wanted to give people a nice wider walking surface that we'd be able to maintain. Also making sure we got that ADA compatibility and accessibility all the way around the reservoir. The other piece of the project is we're going to be installing a couple of new trees, and then we're going to be increasing the picnic areas down there. So we currently have 3 concrete pads with picnic tables and trees. We're going to add 4 more pads that are crusher fine, soft surface, so a little bit lighter impact there, and some trees to provide shading. So they'll have picnic tables and trash cans over there as well. All in all, as far as our park improvements go, it's relatively small scope. We did, as you might recall, in other park projects, we usually do an RFP for services when we're partially through. This was really a pretty cut and dry project. So we did 100% design and then did a hard bid. So the award that we would be asking for tonight is for a fixed fee contract amount as documented in the packet. We did receive 6 bids. They ranged quite a bit in total value. And what I saw was that there was a lot of different types of contractors who bid this work. On one side of the spectrum was GLH, who is a rather large general contractor. They self-perform a lot of earthwork moving. They're doing the Timnath Lakes project. So that's a much larger project than what we're talking about here. All the way down to the group that we're awarding to, and they are maybe more of a landscape and light construction contractor. They're going to be self-performing 100% of the work. So I think they have a lot of value there. They have experience in this project. Are doing this type of work. We had a pre-construction meeting with them about 2 weeks ago where they laid out their schedule, and I asked them a couple of questions. They cited the specifications of the contract right back to me, so I really have a good feel for them. They did come in as the low bidder, so we're happy to award to the low bidder as and then we see a significant project savings over the budget line item, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next agenda item.
Any comments or questions?
I have a quick question about what's the total distance around that pond? Do you know?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but
Okay, I was just kind of curious.
I'll have that for you by the end of the meeting.
Yep, no rush. Thank you.
Brian, I appreciate you getting this done. Obviously, we're going to see a lot more traffic come through here when the Poudre River Trail comes online. So I think it'll be nice to have another way to get around the lake there. Could you just give a quick update on what timing looks like on the river trail and when we might see that?
Sure. So Timnath is actively working on our piece right now. Most of what we're doing is some crosswalk enhancement and signage. But then on the west side, Fort Collins has a piece, and on the south side, Larimer County has a piece. Fort Collins actually had their piece out to bid, but then they ran into a couple of issues with their floodplain department. I will say that we did get a flood use permit approved for this project already. So they have pulled back from that bid, and they're planning probably a later summer, maybe fall construction for their connection piece. Matt, do you know what Larimer County is about in that same window? So I would expect late fall, we would see that kind of full connection happening through.
Anybody else? Do I have a motion to approve resolution number 39, series 2023, a resolution authorizing construction of the 2023 improvements at Whitesell Park?
I move to approve a resolution authorizing construction of the 2023 improvements at Whitesell Park.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Resolution number 39, series 2023. Resolution number 40, series 23, a resolution authorizing additional funds for the Timnath Community Park Phase 3. Again, Brian.
We've been doing a lot of talking today together, so I appreciate your patience. So The community park, when we initially did the budget allocation for that, we awarded the court construction, and then we were still working through a couple of issues with the splash pad design. So as we were working through that piece, so we didn't award the full contract to ECI at the initial. We still had a couple of things we were working out, so we did a kind of a staged award there. As we were doing the initial geotech work on the courts, the recommendation came back for more work than we were expecting. They wanted us to over-X the bottom 2 feet, treat it, moisture treat it and recompact it, and then add a 6-inch crushed concrete base as well. That was really because they saw some instability in some of the bore logs that they saw, and they wanted to make sure, I mean, my experience is that I have not met a professional group of engineers that are more conservative than geotech. And that is because if something goes wrong, they have relatively low fees and relatively high liability. But I do think that some of the things that they brought forward were valid. Some of that dirt that we were working on top of the courts had been moved around quite a bit and not properly compacted. And the last thing we wanted to do was invest all of this money in these courts and then start to have problems with them. So that equated to a little bit more than $150,000 of money that we weren't anticipating. So what we did was we awarded that so we could move that part of the project forward, and we held back on the splash pad and the pavilion as we were still trying to get the pricing dialed in for those. The splash pad came in pretty much exactly where we had budgeted it. So we were able to award that piece to them as well. That's well under construction at this point. Now, and we were kind of keeping an eye on the Whitesell Park project because we expected that to come in a little bit under budget, not quite as far as it did, but we wanted to show some cost savings there and then ask for an additional allocation at the community park so we could add that pavilion back in. That's essentially how we got here. The staff report and the documentation kind of gives all the details of the numbers, but it worked out kind of that it's pretty close there, and we still are able to carry about $22,000 of contingency towards the end of the project for that. Any questions about that?
I'm glad you do. I've been on courts where they didn't have it base compacted well, and you get the crack, you can't fix it anymore.
Yeah, that was our concern, or that we would have some, I mean, they're post-tension slabs, which adds additional reinforcing, but we didn't want to have the whole slab start to tilt or, you know, kind of, we had some concerns.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, just a comment. Just to thank you and all the contractors on the work for this. I know the weather has not been super cooperative for all the work that they've been doing over there. And I'm sure there's been some delays related to that, but it's nice to see the fencing going up around it and to kind of see it all coming together, even the work on the splash pad, and just looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And certainly I think it makes sense to approve this. I would hate to see the pavilion not be part of the project. I know folks have asked, can you just give an update in terms of where things are at with the court construction and why kind of the 30-day pause, and then what our timeline looks like for the rest of the summer?
Yeah, so I'll start with the 30-day pause. So what we did a post-tension slab. So they poured it all in one giant pour. There's cabling in there that holds, basically pulls the slab together. The surfacing that we're going to put on there for the courts seals that slab. So we need to let that slab completely cure, let all of the moisture evaporate out of there, which takes 27 to 30 days before we start putting that seal coat on there. Otherwise, we're not going to get that good cure on the concrete, and we run risks of cracking and other issues down the road that probably would not present themselves for several years. So we would be out of warranty, and those would be our costs to bear. So we wanted to take the conservative approach there, and that's the recommendation by both the post-tension contractor and the surfacing contractor. So it did look like we had kind of just stopped there for a little while. We were hoping that we could be working on fencing during that time, but they had some supply chain issues with the posts for the fence. So we weren't able to get that, but we're doing some catch-up work right now to get us back on schedule. I am hoping that those courts are done and ready for use at the end of July. The weather has not set us back as far as it might have because we were in that cure period for a lot of it. But if it does continue to get this rain, we're going to have to find gaps in the forecast where we can apply some of those surfacing. The surfacing does go down in multiple layers, so we might get one layer down and then have to pause for a little bit before we can get the next layer down until we find that weather window. So, but we've got some allowances for that in that kind of end of July window. The splash pad is going to be a little bit further behind. There's the brains of the splash pad, which is the dome pack that has all the valving and everything in there, is still in manufacturing. We're hoping to get it shipped out, I think, at the end of this week, but that we're looking at probably towards the end of August for opening the splash pad. We're hoping we have an event there. We're hoping that we're going to be able to it's the Taste of Timnath. We're hoping we'll be able to have the splash pad running for the Taste of Timnath and then make sure everything's working great and then winterize it and then bring it online in the spring.
Weren't we going to have a grand opening there at the park?
I think we're going to have a little informal, maybe staff versus council pickleball. Maybe planning commission members would join in on that. I have been voluntold that I will be playing pickleball. So if you want to line up to play against me, you'll have a.
I will play whoever's never played before because I have never played before.
I have one official Phil Goldstein training session.
Well, Phil's, since he is part of executive, he becomes part of the council team.
Oh, so you have a ringer is what you're saying.
We are not above grabbing ringers. All right. Anything else, gentlemen? Okay, Luke.
Yeah, just the 22,000 in contingency. Are you comfortable with where we are in the project and that's going to be enough to get us through?
Yeah, we've pretty much worked through all the design issues. We have a couple of small irrigation changes that need to happen because the as-built were not exactly correct in locating some of the main line infrastructure. But I think I'm pretty comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Do I have a motion to approve resolution number 40, series 2023, a resolution authorizing additional funds for the Timnath Community Park Phase 3?
I'd move to approve resolution 40, series 2023, a resolution authorizing additional funds for the Timnath Community Park Phase 3.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The resolution carries unanimously. Series resolution number 40, series 2023.
Can I add one thing? Sorry.
Excuse me?
Can I add one thing?
Yes.
It's 1.3 miles around. Matt calculated.
Oh.
Thank you. There was the little legend on the bottom, but I wasn't about to, measure with that.
So, we'll be starting the exec session at 6D, not 6C, right?
I believe we're starting at 6C because that was not completed. So I believe you'll have a motion to go back into executive session for the broadband discussion. And then, so you can move that while the public's here and then we can excuse the public for that discussion.
Okay, so that's not an executive session, it's a work session?
No, that's an executive session.
Then
So
why would the public stay?
well, the public can say during the motion if they want,
Oh, okay.
and then they can leave.
All right, that's fine. I just want to make sure I had it clear. Okay, so I need a motion to go into executive session pursuant to 24-6-402 4E CRS for the purpose of determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiation, developing strategy for negotiating, and instructing negotiators related to agreements regarding the Pulse broadband in lieu of the city of Loveland and the broadband providers.
I move to go to executive session as
good.
stated.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are now in exec Oh, is that it? Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn the special Timnath Town Council meeting?
No. Sorry, we're gonna go into 60. So you're gonna have a motion for a second executive session still within.
So we don't want people on.
You do.
They've got to see us move out of one session and then.
You're back
Right.
live again.
All right.
It's a lawyer thing, you know.
So do I have a motion for us to go to executive session pursuant to section 24-6-402- or parent F, parent CRS for discussion of a personnel matter involving candidates for the town attorney position.
I move to go to executive session as stated.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're now in executive session. So Hope, where are you? all that over, so, okay, we'll do the executive meeting first.
Do I just adjourn the regular meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
All right. I move to adjourn.
do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Okay.